but it's not actually in Monday, right? So we need to be on our Wednesday sharpness, like, yeah, I'm there. So you guys are dressed sharp. I really like the outfit. Is pinstripes like required? That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love it. But we gotta be sharp. We gotta be really ready. So what's going on there? You don't have to know the word, right? Like, I'll tell you the word. Just describe to me what's happening. Where's the line? Where's the implied line? Right, where I erased, okay? And I mean, to a certain degree, if you got up close, you could actually see the erase mark through the whole board, right? But really, we're only really seeing that line, especially from a distance where you are. You're seeing it in terms of where the other lines end. Like, I could have done it this way too. Instead of erasing it, I could have done it this way. Like if you want to, who's in English composition right now? No? Okay, one person. Okay, so if you wanted to drive your English comp teacher crazy, right? You could do this typographically. Like you could write a one-page essay about implied lines and implied shapes, right? And then you could just by spacing out the words, you could just make an S-curve running through the whole paragraph all the way through, right? And then hand it in and see what she does about it, or him, right? And you'll probably get a bad grade, so you probably shouldn't do that. But maybe, if you work it well, like they might be impressed. They're like, wow, that's really clever. You address the issue both in the text and visually. A typographical solution. How impressive. Maybe, right? Okay. So you didn't have to do it with eraser. So what we're doing is we're creating an implied shape through the use of negative space, right? The place where there is nothing, where there's a gap, is the implied line. So we'll call that implied line negative space. And remember that, because when we start talking about how to create implied shapes, that's going to come up again. All right. So those are the three main types of lines. So keep that in mind, right? It's going to be important. Next. So the next thing I did was I talked about how to create shapes and how to create value. So let's start with shapes. With a line, what is the most obvious way to make a shape? Like if I told everyone, get out a piece of paper, draw a triangle, what would you do?
Like the outline of it?
Right. You would get out your pen or your pencil and you would do this, right? Okay, right? That's a pretty obvious way with a line to make a shape. We call that delineation. It just basically means to draw a line around it, right? Okay, to delineate. You could use it in your English composition essay because it also can mean things like to draw out an idea. You could say, so I'm going to delineate this, right? And maybe your English composition teacher would be like, well, that's a clever pun. Extra points for her. Or it might be like, I hate puns. -5 points to Gryffindor, right? So that's the obvious one. So what are the less obvious ways to create shapes with lines? Pretty much all of these are different kinds of implied shapes. What would you think of? What's the first thing? If I said, okay, now I want you to make some more shapes, more triangles, draw some triangles, but this time, no line around it, no delineation. You can try any other way, but you can't delineate the triangle. You can't draw a line around it. Come up with other ways using lines to make a triangle. Negative space, okay, right. So here's one form of that, right? So I could do this, right? Just like we did before, right? With the serpentine line, the S curve. Only this time, quite balanced. Let's do this shit now. Okay, so yeah, we could create implied shape through negative space. Right? Okay. And we could also do this, right? Which is kind of similar to the negative space, but like, it doesn't, remember, like, we don't have to just create implied shapes. If we're creating one with a negative space, it doesn't have to be just pure blank, right? It could be something else. So what if we did this? Right? Where the line changes direction. And you can say that's in a way creating a shape through change of texture, as well as kind of using the negative space. So negative space definitely can be a factor. Change of texture. Now, before I put those extra lines in, it was just a blank. There's the reverse of that, right? That is probably the most obvious way. The reverse of that would be to do this. To make a positive shaped triangle just by repeating a set of lines. They don't have to be diagonal lines. I did diagonal lines because that way the very first line is one of the edges of the triangle, right? But you could do the same thing with vertical lines if you wanted to, right? Or with horizontal lines if you wanted to. There, any number of ways you could use lines. Just filling in an area with a set of marks and then keeping the edge of it really crisp and clean. And our eye goes, oh, I see a triangle, right? Okay. So there's one other, or rather, and they all can interact, right? Just like with the implied lines, I said that, like, although there are three main ways that we can create implied lines with shapes, and in general, main ways we can create implied lines, but they really can interact with each other. They can interact with lines that are created through contour in any number of ways. Okay, so the same is true here with implied shapes. So, can anyone think of what the other way you can make an implied triangle?
Corners.
Corners. Wow, yeah, right? Like, how little information do we need to give to make that triangle? Everyone see that triangle? Right? And it's basically what we're doing here is we're really kind of using the same rule as the pointing rule, right? Like, all we need to do is have that line point to that line, and as long as they kind of line up roughly, and vice versa, all the corners are like, yeah, there's a triangle there. And we could even sacrifice one corner and instead just have like a dash there and a dash there, and we still probably would see it. We'd still be like, yeah. One of the things we talked about in class on Monday was that not all implied shapes are the same. Like, some are weaker than others. What I mean by that is, imagine, what if you were making a composition and part of the rule was you had to put lines everywhere, right? Well, with something like this, you put a line going that way and a line going that way,